Welcome to the Essentially You podcast. Dr. Cleopatra, how are you doing today, my love?
I'm doing so well, Mama. So excited to be here with you today.
I am so excited as well. This has been such an incredible journey that we have been on together as my incredible, not only fertility expert, but like mama guru, and I'm so excited to continue our conversations, not only in person, but also here on the podcast, because since I have announced my pregnancy way back earlier this year, a lot of people have wanted to know, just some of the things to do when we're navigating this time. And because I know that there's a lot of conflicting advice out there. I know that sometimes OBGYNs say this or they don't say that. And so it's because you are who I consider to be the utmost guru when it comes to not only getting pregnant, but then also creating super babies during pregnancy. I thought this was a really great opportunity to bring you on and have you clear the air. So before we get into that, Dr. Cleopatra, I'd love for you to just share really quickly kind of that defining moment for you when you knew this was the work you wanted to do in the world.
Yes, it was really at my birth. I lost my mother at birth. My mother was a beautiful 27-year-old woman. So she was super young, but not too young to be giving birth. And she died in childbirth. And she died in childbirth because her life wasn't valued, which is something that still happens to Black and brown women every single day at 42 years later. And by the time I was 5 or 6, I was already so aware of the fact that reproduction is one of the most important things in the world, if not the most important thing in the world. And I wanted to be involved in it. I wanted to know what to do. I wanted to know how to help ensure that it goes well for as many women and children and families as humanly possible in the world. And I really just started to collect data informally as a child. And then 18 years and 1 month, literally 1 month after my 18th birthday, I went into a pregnancy laboratory at the University of Miami. And that's when my work formally began.
That's incredible. I love it. I mean, this is since inception, or since you were so young, you knew this was the work that you wanted to do in the world. And now you've transformed thousands of people's lives, and people in particular who thought that they could never potentially have children. So let's fast forward to, let's say we did get pregnant. Let's say today's the day, peeing on a stick. 4 or 5 of them, because as all women do, right? We buy the 3-pack or the 6-pack of pregnancy tests,
Oh, yes.
And they're all positive.
Yes.
Once one's positive, usually the rest of them are. What do we do next besides kind of process that information, especially if this is what we've been waiting for, this is what we've been looking forward to? I know the next question, I know for me, when I got pregnant, it didn't matter how much I had researched before pregnancy. Once you are pregnant, it just changes everything. You're like, okay, this is going down. And you want to do everything you can nutritionally, developmentally for this growing fetus that is going to do some miraculous things in the next 9 to 10 months, including what I understand is grow 100 billion neurons, which are brain cells. And so talk to me about, what are some of the first steps that we should be taking when we find out we're pregnant, especially if we are trying to do everything possible to have a really healthy baby?
I love all this so much. So first of all, those moments are what I live for. Those moments when you pee on the stick and you get the result that you've been waiting for. And even when you've been waiting for it, it's still a lot to take in. And there's a lot of processing that happens. And in that moment, it's like a laser. Everything in your life comes into very sharp focus. And that means all the things that are working well and all the things that aren't working well. So pregnancy is this beautiful rite of passage, not just for our babies and our super babies, but also for us as humans and as mothers. And it's such a sacred time that I think we've lost a lot of the beauty around how sacred that time is in this really fast-paced life that we're all living today. So one of the first things that I want you to remember is that if you primestered, you started to create that epigenetic foundation for your super baby, meaning that you get to have the healthiest, happiest, brightest, most well-adjusted baby that you can possibly have, given your genome and your epigenome and that of the other person who's providing DNA for your baby. If you didn't primester, you still have the opportunity to create this epigenetic foundation for your baby and to create your super baby. So even though we get a lot of messages about pregnancy being this time when you can pretty much eat whatever you want because you're already going to be gaining weight anyway, etc., this is actually not the time to indulge on all the things that you Twinkies and all the things that you don't eat normally because you're going to be gaining weight anyway, because everything that you're consuming, doing, etc., I want you to think about, do I want to grow my baby's brain, body, immune system, stress response on this substance, whether it's food, drink, a medication, a drug, whatever it may be, or even a thought, by the way. So I want you to ask yourself that question, and I want that to be your guiding light. Do I want to grow my baby on this thing? And if you don't want to grow your baby on this thing, then leave that thing alone. If you love the idea of your baby growing on that thing, then go all in on that thing. So when you have that moment, you get the pregnancy test, here's one of the first things that I want you to do, especially if you're a woman who's farther along in her reproductive span in her 30s or 40s, but wherever you are in your reproductive span, now's a great time to call your OB, set up your first appointment for your first ultrasound. Every OB is different as to when they want you to come in for that ultrasound. Some want you to come in as early as 6 weeks. Some are more like 8 or 9 weeks. Whichever your OB does is all good. So call and set that appointment, but also ask to go in that day, the next day, or the next Monday, whatever it may be, and have a couple of tests run. You don't need advance notice to get those appointments usually, because the office staff, rather than the doctor, are the ones who do the blood draw for you. So here are a couple of things you want to look at. You can look at the HCG levels, which are the HCG is the pregnancy hormone. That's what tripped the positive pregnancy test in the first place. You can look at your estradiol level. You can look at your progesterone level. A lot of women in their 30s and 40s especially will need some progesterone supplementation, and that's totally fine. So go in there, have those things looked at. In addition, a great thing to look at is your vitamin D level, and also to run a full thyroid panel. I'm not just talking about TSH, which is what doctors will typically run when they're looking at your thyroid function. I want you to have the full panel. So TSH, also looking at T3, T4, and antibodies. So those are a good battery of tests to have run pretty much as soon as you get your positive pregnancy test. A lot of doctors will think that it's not necessary, but that's you being proactive. And guess what? You are going to start to learn to be proactive on behalf of your super baby starting in that moment, because you will be doing that for the rest of your life. You are not going to defer to doctors, teachers, coaches, or anyone else to make the ultimate decisions for your super baby or your family as a whole. So this is that first moment where you start to be proactive on behalf of yourself and your super baby. And like I said, it will be a lifelong journey and process being proactive in that way. So I want you to do those tests initially, and then it's a great idea to continue to run a full thyroid panel and your vitamin D levels at least once a trimester. If you have any indication of hyper or hypothyroidism, and hypothyroidism is much more common in pregnancy than hyperthyroidism. And even if you didn't start out with anything going on with your thyroid, pregnancy can often create conditions that contribute to changes in the thyroid, which is why it's a great thing to monitor at least once a trimester. If something is detected, then you'll probably want to monitor even more frequently than that. For example, every 6 weeks. So that's what I want you to do from a very practical standpoint when you first get your positive pregnancy test.
I think that is so wise. And a couple of things just from my own personal experience, because we work together. I'm going to have you talk, and we're going to speak into the epigenetics and the nutrition and the supplement component in just a moment. But, it was so critical. I know that I was on, just to let people know, full disclosure, I was on supplemental progesterone until week 15, give or take. So I got well into the second trimester. And then, as I've touted many times on the show, that I have hypothyroid driven by Hashimoto's. And so I've had my thyroid tested every 5 to 6 weeks since I've been pregnant so that we can monitor that this whole time. And so often as women, we just don't know our numbers until we know our numbers. And it's really important that we look at those things so that we can continue to support the fetus's development throughout the process. And your fetus needs those hormones. Your fetus needs estradiol, 100% needs progesterone. That's literally the pregnancy hormone in a lot of ways. And then we also need we need thyroid because we run cellular metabolism. And if we want that baby to run cellular metabolism as well, we're going to need that too. So just kind of speaking into that from personal experience, how critical those things are to know. And especially as we get older, some of those things can just be potentially, I wouldn't call them necessarily a concern, but just something that we need to watch out for.
Yes, I completely agree with you, Dr. Marisa. And I think that traditional OBGYNs are not necessarily thinking about being proactive in this way, because here's the thing, from their perspective, as much as they care about their patients, pregnancies are abundant. And so they're not watching any one pregnancy that closely. But to us as mamas, I have 3 super babies. I have helped women in 22 countries on 6 continents have their super babies. Every one of those babies means the world to me. And so when it's our pregnancy, when that baby means the world to us, we are watching the pregnancy very closely. That's not to say being anxious or trying to control every aspect of the pregnancy, because that's unrealistic. And I forget who wrote the book who said that the work of pregnancy is worrying. And it's true. As a mama, as a parent, you will worry from start to finish. It will never end. At every stage, there are new worries. One of the things that we're known for at the Fertility and Pregnancy Institute is the Primemester, that time leading up to conception, to help people get pregnant, like with you, Dr. Marisa, and also to help people make their super babies, like with you, Dr. Marisa. And I have heard so many of our mamas say that, before primestering, I struggled for so long to get pregnant. And then once I finally got pregnant, I realized that this was really the beginning of the worrying. I thought I was so worried before, but when you get the pregnancy, then the worry, the stakes get higher in a way, because then the person is there with you. Your super baby is there with you. So I want you to know that worry is a natural part of the fertility and pregnancy and parenting process. It goes on and on and on. And to some degree, we surrender and soften into that worry because it will never completely go away. So I don't mean by being proactive that I want you to dive into that worry, because that's not going to serve you in any way. But there are things that we know that we can take intelligent and proactive action on. And when it comes to those things, I want you to be very committed to doing them and being on top of them. So the vast majority of miscarriages happen due to chromosomal abnormality. When we primester, we reduce the likelihood of having that experience. There are some miscarriages that happen because of inadequate pregnancy hormones, and usually that is progesterone, but it also could be estradiol, it also could be thyroid hormone. And so because of that, we want to be watching those hormone levels, and it's very common for women to need to supplement progesterone and even sometimes to supplement estrogen. And progesterone supplementation usually goes until the end of the first trimester. Once the placenta is formed, it starts taking over progesterone production. So for most people, they don't need progesterone supplementation once the placenta is producing progesterone. But that's not the case for everybody. And some people will even need to continue supplementing progesterone throughout their pregnancy, especially if they have a history of preterm labor or preterm birth. In that case, we have a lot of scientific evidence that progesterone shots throughout the pregnancy can help to carry the pregnancy to full term, and that will be put into place automatically, if or should be put into place automatically if somebody has experienced a preterm birth in the past.
It's so important for all that clarity,
Yes.
because I think so often we hear a little bit of this, we hear a little bit of that, but we're not sure, we don't understand why. And
Yes.
so thank you so much for that clarity. Okay,
You're
so I want to
so
move into supplementation and food. So one of the things that you started off with is, yes, so often you'll hear from pregnant women who are just like, I can eat whatever I want. And here's the thing is that if you and I both know food is information.
So much.
All the time. And that food is not only information for you, but it's information for the baby, especially when we're creating eyeball cells and heart cells and brain cells and liver cells. All those things are being created all at the same time.
Yeah.
And so we do want to be mindful about, making sure that we're getting all the right nutrients, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, everything that we really want to help our baby thrive. Because as you mentioned, epigenetics plays a huge role here. And kind of the definition of epigenetics is that, it's constantly changing for us. And then we're passing that information down to our fetuses and to our babies. And so talk to me about how should we be focusing on our food and what should we be eating? How should we be mindful? And I know it changes trimester a little bit, and I always love to be food focused because I know food is like the critical information. But then, girl, I ain't gonna pretend like I'm not taking 12 supplements a day.
Oh, at least 12. I might be taking like 50. So I get it. Yes. Okay, so food is information. It is so important, and really think of that information as input that determines the output, both for you and for your super baby. And we all want our super babies because we want our children to be the healthiest, happiest, brightest, most well-adjusted human beings they can be, so that they can have a beautiful life, because that's all any of us want as parents, for our children, our grandchildren, all of our lineage to have the most beautiful life they possibly can. So I'm going to give you the Fertile Food Pyramid, as we call it at the Fertility and Pregnancy Institute. And this Fertile Food Pyramid is a great idea to continue, not just in the primester, but throughout pregnancy. I'll give you some tweaks for how to eat during pregnancy as opposed to how we generally eat during the primester. And then let's talk about micronutrient supplementation as well. So when it comes to the Fertile Food Pyramid, I want you to think about the highest quantities being at the bottom and then going up from there. So at the bottom, we have really high quality fats. I'm not talking about trans fats. I'm not talking about hydrogenated oils. And throughout the food pyramid, the Fertile Food Pyramid, I really want you to focus on whole foods. These aren't foods that have ingredients because they are ingredients. They don't have other ingredients. And I know that it's hard to be perfect. I don't want you to try to be perfect, especially if you already suffer from perfectionism, which Brené Brown calls one of the highest forms of violence that we do to ourselves, trying to be perfect. So I don't want you to strive for perfectionism, but I want you to strive for at least 80-20 to the extent that you can. When it comes to foods that you know that you are sensitive to or that you have a full-blown allergy to, and the only way you know this for sure is if you do food sensitivity testing. When it comes to those foods, I do want you to be perfect. That's the one place where I want you to be perfect, because any tiny dosage of foods that we're sensitive or allergic to that are creating an immune response in our bodies are going to be creating inflammation and other things that make it harder to have a healthy pregnancy, and also make it harder for our babies to have their very best epigenetic foundation. So I want you to, that food sensitivity testing is another good thing to do once a trimester, because that's also changing constantly. The things that you were sensitive to in the past, you may or may not continue to be sensitive to, especially if you stopped consuming them for a while. So when it comes to food sensitivities, I do want you to go all in on staying away from those things. But everything else, you can use the 80-20 rule. So again, the Fertile Food Pyramid is largely focused on whole, real foods. I'm not talking about shopping at Whole Foods, although you can get them there if you like, but I'm talking about foods that grow and that you would recognize in their purest form. So at the very bottom are really high quality fats. This can be a good mix of saturated and unsaturated fats. Now, depending on your genome, you may need even less saturated fat. But for people who don't know their genome or know that their genome allows for them to have both saturated and unsaturated fats in decent amounts, I want you to use a mix of these. So I'm talking about things like olive oil, avocado oil, and then of the saturated fats, I'm talking about grass-fed ghee. You could even do grass-fed butter if the milk fat in it isn't bothering you. The ghee basically has gotten rid of all of the milk fat, so it's a great option. And then also coconut oil. If your genomic data tell us that you should keep your saturated fat to 10% of your fat intake or even lower, then you would want to not do as much of the ghee, the butter, the coconut oil, and focus on olive oil and avocado oil. I want you to stay away from vegetable oils and also seed oils and nut oils because of the high omega-6 content and how they are distorted when they're heated and other things. They're just not the most beneficial fats. So that's what we're talking about at the base. The next thing is the highest quality protein that you can get your hands on. So based on your budget and whatever else you're working with, access. So local, grass-fed, organic, those are the kinds of things that you want to be focused on here. If you're vegan or vegetarian, it's a little bit harder to get the kinds of protein that you need, but you can use certain kinds of seeds like chia seeds, flax seeds, if you can get very good quality tofu that's organic and non-GMO, you can use tofu. And you just have to get creative about ensuring that you're getting the sources of protein that you need. Proteins are the building blocks of your baby, so it's very important that you're getting complete proteins in your diet. Then from there, I want you to really focus on leafy green vegetables and cruciferous vegetables. Ideally, these would be organic. It might be the case that having them when they're not organic is counterproductive because they sop up so much. That's one of the reasons why they work so well in the body, that if they're grown in highly contaminated soil that's heavy in pesticides, they may be grabbing onto them so much that it actually could be exposing you to even more. That's a very controversial statement. I wouldn't want you to not be eating vegetables if you can't afford to have organic vegetables, but I want you to be really mindful. So even if you had to have frozen instead of fresh, but they could be organic, that might be the way to go. So be creative with whatever conditions you are faced with, money, schedule, time, whatever it may be. So green vegetables and cruciferous vegetables. Then from there, I want you to really focus on the colors of the rainbow. So the brightly colored fruits and vegetables, try to keep them lower on the glycemic index. We don't want your blood sugar getting very high over and over again throughout the day. Having too much sugar and having difficulties regulating blood sugar during pregnancy can be very, very consequential for the mama and also for the baby. There's risk of gestational diabetes, risk of preterm birth, preeclampsia, all kinds of things. And having a baby who is what we call in science macrosomic, which is too big, and being both too small and too big at birth can set someone up on a trajectory for having risk for diabetes, for obesity, and disrupted microbiome, which also then contributes to risk of these things. So we want to be really mindful of our sugar exposure. And when we're talking about sugar, I don't mean just eating junk food or eating straight sugar, but things that are converted to sugar quickly in the body. So that does include fruit, unfortunately. I love fruit. That's the one thing in the way that I eat that I could definitely eat a lot more fruit if I didn't regulate that part of my eating, because I love fruit so much. But so fruit and also grains, because many of the grains that we think of as being quote unquote healthy are really converting into just many tablespoons of sugar in the body, and that's not serving us.
Also dairy. some
And dairy also. Yes. So you'll see that on this fertile food pyramid, we don't have a place for grains and we don't have a place for dairy.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I'm not saying that you absolutely can't have those things, but they're not part of the fertile food pyramid. If you have them, they're just extra things that you're adding, especially
they've been off of my program the whole time.
Yes, exactly, absolutely. So then from there, I want you to focus on prebiotic foods and also probiotic foods. Your microbiome is conditioning your baby's microbiome in utero. You really can think of the microbiome as the second genome. So when we're thinking about epigenetic foundation and epigenetic modifications and marks that we want to pass down intergenerationally to our super babies and our super grandbabies, we really, really want to be taking care of the richness and diversity of our microbiome. So that is essentially the fertile food pyramid. Anything else that you have on top of that is extra. And if you're going to be eating grains, then I encourage you to be eating gluten-free grains. And, there are some people who say that it's actually a good idea to sort of vaccinate in the third trimester with some gluten so that your baby will not have difficulty consuming gluten later on. I've never done this. I'm completely gluten-free. I didn't do this in any of my pregnancies. Some people recommend that you do it. And if you want to do it, you can do it. However, if you show up as being sensitive in your food sensitivities test to gluten, then I absolutely would not do it. And also the thing is that there's no reason why your baby needs to eat gluten either. So my children, we're gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free at home. And when they go to birthday parties or whatever, if they want to have cake, they can. I don't want them to feel like I'm depriving them of anything, but they don't have much of a taste for it. So they'll have some. It doesn't seem to bother them that much. They don't feel great when they have it, but it's fine. So, I think because
they're getting all of it at once. They're getting gluten, sugar, and dairy all in one food.
So whammy, right? They totally they're super high energy, but they definitely get more tired after having eaten something like that because their bodies are not used to it because it's not life-giving. It's not life-giving. And I know it's not fun to hear, but when you don't eat those things and then you do bring them back in, you can't help but notice how they just don't make you feel that good.
No, I agree. And I just want to speak into that as well. When we look at inflammation, which is kind of the linchpin when it comes to disease in the body, the three major levers to trigger inflammation when it comes to food are going to be gluten and potentially grains in general, but definitely gluten-driven grains, which are most grains, dairy. And I was talking to my husband just yesterday about dairy. A lot of people think, dairy is only going to be, you're going to feel it in the gut. And I was like, maybe if you have lactose intolerance, but most dairy intolerances it's a respiratory, it's upper respiratory, it's migraines, it's joint pain. It doesn't show up as a gut issue. It shows up all these other places and people mistaken it for something else. So dairy, and then girl, you know how I feel about sugar. And, and especially during pregnancy where we've got to really regulate. We know that there are hormones when we're pregnant that make insulin less sensitive. We become more insulin resistant. And so excess amounts of sugar are definitely driving inflammation, but also driving a deregulation of insulin in the body. And that's why kind of one of the first triggers that we see for diabetes in women can be gestational diabetes. And so, and that information really isn't serving our babies either. So I love that you bring this up. We were having this conversation with family over the weekend about how, we plan on raising our little baby boy, no gluten-free, sugar-free, dairy-free. And there was a little bit of pushback. And I was just like, I know that we can raise our child not only in the, as a fetus, but also out of the world without these triggering foods, especially with the amount of toxins and all kinds of stuff that we're dealing with these days. Once children get out into the world, you'd have a better chance of setting them up for success. Like you said, love the idea of life-giving foods.
Yes.
It's really the focus, not only in utero, but then after they're born as well.
It is. I mean, it's one of the things that we do most frequently in life is eat. And
Yes.
so it's one of the most important inputs. It's one of the most important sources of information. And we want to make sure that that input, that source of information is life-giving as much as possible. It's the same thing that you want to do for yourself, but you for sure want to do it for your super babies. And the thing is that you're conditioning your baby's tastes and preferences. So my 2-year-old is obsessed with broccoli. It's one of his favorite foods. He's also obsessed with carrots and cucumbers. I'm just talking raw, not having taken the skin off of, because he has my tastes. And he also loves fish oil because I've been giving him fish oil since he could consume food. And I used lots of fish oil during pregnancy. We're going to talk about micronutrient supplementation. But these things they start with us. So if you want to set your babies up for success, it starts with us. And I know that's hard. It's not easy. It's always the responsibility starts with us, but it's also an incredible opportunity. And I want to say, I don't think it's unusual how your family gave you pushback on how you're going to be raising your beautiful, yummy super baby boy. And here's why. Because it sounds like it's not normal. Like you're doing something different from what everybody else is doing. Like, isn't it normal to have grains or gluten? Isn't it normal to have dairy? Isn't it normal to have sugar? And I'm going to say something a little bit controversial. And what I'm going to say is that just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean that it's the right thing, and doesn't mean it's the right thing for us. So let me tell you what everyone doing has gotten us to at this time in history. For the first time in history, average life expectancy has been declining as opposed to growing since 2014. We have huge epidemics of type 2 diabetes, type 3 diabetes, which is Alzheimer's disease. And by the way, the same constellation of pathologies that underlie type 2 diabetes and type 3 diabetes, and it's the same one, they just show up in different decades of life, begin in the second and third decades of life, showing up as fertility challenges, which is why fertility challenges are on the rise as well. I have termed that type F diabetes. We have these epidemics of obesity, type 2, type 3 diabetes, other kinds of degenerative diseases, because they were set into motion decades ago in our parents' primester, in our grandparents' primester and pregnancies. So if we don't want those trajectories to continue in our society, and especially not within our own families, we don't want to be doing what everybody else is doing. And I know that's not fun necessarily or convenient, although when you live that way, you feel differently about it because you feel like it's such a gift that you get to eat such beautiful food that supports your vitality and your brain function and how you want to look and feel and be and show up in the world and what you want to contribute. Because if you don't have the brain power or the energy in your body, you can't possibly do and be all the things that you want to do and be in this life. So I think of it as an incredible opportunity, so much so that we call our nutrition division at the Fertility and Pregnancy Institute the Nutritional Gifts Division, because it is a gift that you give to yourself and your super baby. I don't want you to think of it as restricting yourself or depriving yourself in any way. So let's talk about, with the time that we have left, micronutrient supplementation. So
we got a couple minutes left. So girl, we're going to have you run through it.
All right, we're going to do it fast. Okay, so there are 5 core supplements for the primester, pregnancy, and the postpartum period. So the first one is a high quality food-based prenatal vitamin. I like the Thorne prenatal vitamin until our supplements are ready, and then I highly recommend those. So then the Thorne prenatal, and then a probiotic. And what I recommend is different strains of probiotics that help to increase the richness and diversity of your microbiome and therefore your baby's microbiome. And then I want you to also be looking into the possibility of vitamin D supplementation. Now, you want to be measuring and monitoring your vitamin D levels, but in pregnancy, the general recommendation is at least 4,000 IUs per day. It's different from non-pregnant populations. And then the other thing that you're looking at is a B complex, so that you're getting more of the B vitamins than are just in the prenatal vitamins. So here I want you to especially be paying attention to methylated forms of B vitamins. And I want you to be looking at, in particular, methylated folate, choline, and then also B12. So the B vitamins are very important. If we have time, I can say a little bit more about the B vitamins. And then the next one, and this is the fifth one, is omega-3s, getting fish oil. And if you're a vegetarian, you can use algae sources of fish oil. If you're not vegetarian or vegan, then you can use a combination of fish oil and algae sources. Those are incredibly important for your baby's brain development, as is choline. And saying more about the B vitamins, anemia is very important to stay on top of during pregnancy. And there can be a relationship of deficiencies in folate and B12 that contribute to anemia. So these things are all related to one another. So you may need, this is not part of the core supplements because not everybody needs it, but based on your own body, you may need some iron supplementation. Mm-hmm. However, you want to look at your B vitamins as well if you are experiencing anemia, and also you don't want your iron supplementation to be from liver because of the high vitamin A content in liver that is not safe for pregnancy.
Perfect. And it's in full alignment with what I believe to be true as well. And again, majority of prenatals aren't bringing the abundance of the ones that you just mentioned. So yes, it's important to have a foundational prenatal because there's important key minerals and other vitamins in there that we need, but we do need an abundance, more abundance of the vitamins that you mentioned. So we both agree that those need to be taken individually.
Yes.
Absolutely. On top of the prenatal.
On top of, absolutely. And the last thing I'll say is that if somebody has experienced a miscarriage or there are known or suspected chromosomal abnormalities, whether you've done IVF and seen that your embryos weren't chromosomally normal or you've had difficulty getting or staying pregnant, the Centers for Disease Control recommends a high dosage of methylated folate, up to 4 grams. And if you are somebody who has ulcerative colitis or another type of inflammatory condition, it may even be up to 5 grams of methylated folate.
Perfect. So definitely make sure that we step up our methylated folate, especially if there are some inflammatory conditions that could be driving down. We're just not processing enough. We're not getting enough of it in, or it's not crossing through to the blood. Dr. Cleopatra, thank you so much, not only for painting the picture of what to do when we get pregnant, but also how to nourish our bodies and our babies' bodies, and then the importance of supplementation. You know, I remember when I posted something, I did a whole episode on supplementation for each trimester and postpartum. And I was amazed. I had posted on social and I had several women tell me that their OBGYN said that they didn't even need a prenatal.
I know.
And I was like, what?
No.
What? I did. So I really am so grateful that you went over those very quickly, you know, in a time where, again, even though food is powerful, we are lacking some of those nutrients. In a time where stress is high and we're burning through nutrition as well, we're burning through key nutrients. We just need to really make sure that we've got everything that we need for our growing babies.
Yes, absolutely. And also based on your genome, you may need more methylated folate because your methylation processes are constrained. So there are a lot of factors, and I don't think that we want to rely on the consensus for making these decisions because, like I said, look where the consensus has gotten us. Yes. And I know that that's a controversial statement, but it is a true statement.
It is a true statement. Now, where can we find you, my dear?
So come visit us at the Fertility and Pregnancy Institute website. It's fertilitypregnancy.org. We have a new website going up that's so beautiful, so I'm excited for you to visit us there. And if you are in your Primemester wanting to get pregnant, there's the Ultimate Fertility Checklist is there. You can grab that for yourself. It has incredible information.
Perfect. We will have both of those links inside the show notes for this episode. Dr.
Thank
Cleopatra, I know we're going to get you to come back one more time later on just to kind of conclude our pregnancy episodes. And I'm super excited for you to jump back on with me for one more interview. And thank you so much for coming on today.
You're so welcome. Can't wait to talk postpartum with you. Love
Yes.
you, Mama and
Bye.
baby.